Hi, Alicia here. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to do the horror life tag. Yep. So the horror life tag is an awesome book/movie tag that was created by Marie McWilliams. I will link her channel below. I highly recommend checking her out. The horror life tag is just a good excuse to talk about spooky books and spooky movies. And what better way to kick off Halloween-a-thon than with a horror tag. So there are 8 questions that I will go through in this tag, and we'll just talk about some spooky shit. Let's get into those questions. Question 1 is, what is the first horror movie you remember seeing? So I have like the world's most garbage memory anyways, like I hardly remember anything, but I have a definitive memory tied to being very young, way too young, probably like 6-ish, and watching The Shining with my mom. I don't know why I was watching it. I don't know if I was even allowed to be watching it or if I was like sneaking in the background watching this movie, but I watched it and it just ruined me. Like, this movie, of course it would. I was only 6 watching The Shining, and it scared the absolute hell out of me. This movie actually kind of wrecked horror for me before it even started for me, because after having just seen this movie, I don't even remember if I watched the whole movie or if I just saw parts of it, but after having seen The Shining, I had a phobia of horror. Even just the concept of it was so scary. If I heard my parents watching The X-Files in the other room, ugh, even the music, that was too much for me. This movie scared me so much, and it actually took quite a long time to come back around on it, but I did. Question 2 is, what is the first horror book that you remember reading? So post The Shining, I kind of shied away from horror things, but I definitely did read those kid horror that you could only find in scholastic books. So I definitely read Goosebumps by R.L. Stine, preferably the Choose Your Own Adventure ones, because I liked having some control. Does anybody else remember Bunnicula? The Bunnicula series about the vampire rabbit? So I definitely read Bunnicula, The Celery Stalks at Midnight. I mean, yeah. I also read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz, but even that, after The Shining, those pictures, man, those were just way too much for me at the time. I'd crack in the page and see the spooky image of the lady in the chest and be like, ah, nope, not interested. Nightmares from Scary Stories. Question 3 is, what is the movie that made you a horror fan? So after my childhood of being super scared of horror, one of my best friends in elementary, middle school, and high school, I would always go and sleep over at her house, and her family was obsessed with horror movies. They would go and rent just the cheesiest movies they could find, and they would watch them, and they would all laugh at them together. So I don't know if it was the first time or at some point in my history of going over to her house all the time, we ended up watching The Nightmare on Elm Street, and I really didn't want to watch it. I remember her fighting with me into pressuring me into watching this movie. I really didn't want to, and she promised me it would be okay, and I just had this awakening when I was watching The Nightmare on Elm Street, where I realized that horror could be funny, and it could be campy, and it could be cheesy, and there was a lot to love in that, and I loved that. And we watched so many movies. We watched all of the Friday the 13th, we watched Sleepaway Camp, we even got into some the scarier ones, we watched The Omen, but she really opened my eyes into the world of the fun side, or what was charming about horror. I definitely credit her and her family for getting me over being scared of it. And then I just I couldn't get enough after that. Question 4 is, what is the book that made you a horror fan? So I didn't read horror for a really long time. I think I was maybe in the end of high school, maybe even like early university, and I read Night Shift by Stephen King, which was a collection of short stories. My mom gave it to me, and I loved it. And at some point in the last 15 years, after this, like, I've just like gone crazy for horror, reading as much as I can and watching as many movies as I can by myself. So I've come like full circle in like not even wanting to be in a room with a scary movie like on the table, to just like hungrily watching all of these things by myself in the dark. Question 5 is, what is your favorite horror movie of all time? And this is an impossible question. I cannot answer it. There is not one. Trying to pick one horror movie is impossible because there are so many like subgenres within horror, and trying to compare those and like rank those different tropes and different genres is like trying to compare apples to like needles or something. It's just like, it's not possible. But I could probably narrow it down to 5. So I will give you my top 5 horror movies. And I guarantee that as soon as I finish filming this, I'm going to remember another one that's just going to completely obliterate this list. So this is the top 5 that I can think of today. So the first one is May. I love this movie. It holds a very special place in my heart. I watched it when I was in high school, and I have loved it ever since. This is very much of the slasher teen movie where you're rooting for / following the villain, is from the point of view of the bad guy. Love May. 2 is Dead Alive. If you haven't seen Dead Alive, please do. It is an insane zombie movie made by Peter Jackson. It's wonderful. It's great. Watch Dead Alive. 3 is The Thing. Everybody loves The Thing. Everybody loves those big monsters. Everybody loves that crazy dog at the beginning. 4 is You're Next. Best slasher. Love that slasher movie. Watch You're Next. And then 5 is Creep. If you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, not even a doubt in my mind that like 10 years ago Alicia would have said Idle Hands. I think I've seen that movie more than any other movie that's ever been made. When I was a teenager, I was obsessed with this movie. I was obsessed with everyone in it. I'm pretty sure, I haven't seen it in like maybe 12 years, but I'm pretty sure I could like narrate the entire movie from beginning to end. So Idle Hands gets an honorable mention. 6, what is your favorite horror book? Again, this is a really difficult question to answer, but if I went to my shelf and went to go pick something that just was like pulling to me in some kind of way, it'd probably be The Trope. The Trope, my entire experience reading this book was just perfect. It was a perfect experience for me. So The Troop, if you haven't read it, is about a group of Boy Scouts who go on a weekend camping trip into the Canadian wilderness, and while they're there at their cabin, some man comes to their camp and there's something very wrong with him, and it becomes a survival story with this troop against this like virus, but also against each other and other people. And it is so disgusting, and it's so horrifying, and it's so fun. And when I picked up this book, I knew nothing about it. I had heard absolutely nothing about this book, and I just walked into a used bookstore and I read the back and I was like, this sounds good, because I also spent my entire childhood, teen years, late teen years being a Girl Guide, which is like the girl equivalent to Scouts. So that experience was just like very near and dear to my heart, and I picked this book up because I was going to go to a cabin in the Canadian wilderness. I'm like, this seems like something that's like, I'm doing it, so let's read it. And I read the whole thing in this cabin in the winter, in the middle of nowhere, and the experience of it was chef's kiss. It was just a perfect thing. I just want everybody to read this book, but I guarantee that nobody's going to have the same experience as me. Everybody's experience is different, but mine was amazing. If it wasn't The Troop, I'd probably say The Monk by Matthew Lewis. That book awakened something in me within like the genre of gothic horror, gothic literature. I love that one. Let's see. Question 7 is, what is your favorite horror trope? So in books, my favorite horror trope is definitely like coming of age, kids versus evil. I feel like I've said that before, but that is definitely something that I love reading. I love that in the book medium because you have a lot of time to flesh out the characters and flesh out the story, so the impact is much greater. I do like this trope in movies as well, but I feel like books is definitely where that trope shines. In movies, it would probably be within the slasher subgenre. I love movies where there is all of the like character archetypes that are getting picked off until there's only one left. So that's like classic slasher, but even more so when there's like some sort of game involved. So that being said, I actually do not like the Saw franchise at all, but I feel like the Saw franchise like perfectly encapsulates that. But it's like the Cube. If you've seen Cube, like that's exactly what I'm talking about, where there's like a bunch of people, they're all there, they're all together, and then there's like a game or something that happens, or some sort of mission where they have to like solve it, and they have to use their very specific like character archetypes to help figure it out until there's like only one left, or two left, or three left, or none left. Who knows? That's all the fun of it. But it's following and trying to like pick, being like, no, you're dying. No, you're dying too. No, you might make it. No, you died. That was a trick. So love that one. Love that one for movies. Question 8 is, why do you love horror? I feel like definitely in terms of my media consumption, I am a very indulgent person. Like I like to read things that are going to make me feel something really strongly. So I love going into a movie that I know is going to make me cry. I love going into a book that I'm just like, this is going to warm me, this is going to hurt me. I love going into movies or books that are going to spook me real hard. Like I chase it. I chase the terror. And I feel like if I had to try and articulate why that is, I am naturally a very anxious person. And if you have anxiety, you know that a lot of it is like, you can't tie it to a specific thing. It's just this force within you. And when you watch scary movies, I feel like that is an outlet to channel it. You're putting it somewhere so it makes sense to you. I don't actually even know if that makes sense, but that's in my head. That's how I feel. I watch these things, they scare me really hard, and I end up feeling better after having done it. I also don't really get like long lasting effects of like fear. So if I sat down and watched the like scariest thing I'd ever seen, I could then just go turn off the light and just go to bed and be cool. It's like very rare that something has affected me like long term from having read it or having watched it. So I love the challenge. Come on and get me, spooky thing. I wanna be spooked. So that was the book tag. I really appreciate this tag being made. I really like being able to participate in it. If you feel like doing it, you should also do that. I've linked the information to the original tag below, and I would love to hear your answers to these questions. It's something that's like, I feel like it's very personal to a person, and it really helps shed some light in getting to know that person. So tell me what's what. Until next time. Bye, pals.